Hello and welcome to Scilence, a podcast that gives women a chance to get honest and open about what it's really like surviving and thriving in what often feels like a male-dominated world. All of my guests have been handpicked from the fields of science, technology, engineering and mathematics, or STEM, where inclusivity and diversity can be a real issue. I know this only too well, having been a mechanical engineer myself for a number of years. I'm Dr. Shanice O'Mara, now a television broadcaster. I've worked on and reported on some cutting-edge technology and innovation over the years, and through my TV work, I've met some incredibly inspiring women from a diverse range of STEM fields. These women are true trailblazers, and I often have felt so empowered myself by learning what they're like as real people, usually when the cameras have been turned off. Each week on Scilence, one of these women shares her unique experiences and truth without the usual pressure of having to promote her accomplishments or uphold an image or facade. How? Because all of my guests are deliberately kept anonymous and disguised to ensure that we as listeners are not distracted or even intimidated by all the usual kinds of societal labels. The women of STEM on this show have amazingly impressive CVs, but most importantly, they're human, just like the rest of us, and I want to share the inspiration and wisdom that I have enjoyed from them with you. It's my hope that you really relate to what we chat about today. If so, please do subscribe to Scilence and maybe even leave some comments and reviews. I'd love to have your feedback. This week, my guest is in the field of DevOps Engineering. Hi.
Hello, good morning.
How are you?
Terrific. I'm just getting my week started, so I'm excited to be here with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. How did you feel when you found out that it was anonymous?
You know, I had done a fair amount of just different talks, public events before, so there are a couple of different feelings, I guess mixed feelings. One is I'm used to having to prepare something where I know it's partially just sharing with the community and being open, but also to be able to highlight some personal info about myself. But here, I guess it's a little bit more open where I can be able to share things without having to relate it or tie it to myself personally or use it as a tool of some other kind. So I guess it's just a little bit more of a way to have a candid conversation, I suppose.
Yeah, it takes some getting used to because I think we live in a world where, especially as women, we have to be so mindful of the way we carry ourselves, particularly at work. Do you find that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely at work. And also I feel like as women that are building and becoming prominent in their different professions, there's the added pressure of your performance at work, but also in the public space because everything is so social and connected now. So there's almost this expectation that if you get to leadership in your field, that you're not only doing your job at work, you're doing promotion and engaging on different mediums like Twitter. You're also out there and writing blog posts and doing talks at conferences and so on. And so there's this kind of accumulation of the way that you're behaving and presenting yourself and the things that you have to do to be able to be, I guess, recognized as a leader in your field or whatever you'd like to say.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel that pressure personally to uphold a certain image, or are you truly yourself at work?
I think I have done just throughout my career a bit of segmenting of myself as a professional versus myself personally. So I'm myself in the professional sense, but there are enough just either, I wouldn't quite say walls, but I don't completely let myself go, I suppose, at work when I'm interacting with colleagues and talking. You know, there are certain things that I'll reserve for just personal life that I might not either bring up at work or I might not act just because I'm kind of in this different mode of, you know, being in a workplace or being in the office or so on.
Yeah.
And I think it definitely varies as well depending on the industry that I'm in, because I'm in a little bit more of a formal corporate industry right now, and the way that I express myself in a personal way at work is very different than when I was at a startup, for example, because I was previously a very creative startup and the culture was very different. And so I think I've done a lot to sort of adapt myself to the culture that I'm in, and let those pieces of my, I guess, personality uh, be present in the workplace.
That's so interesting. I've been very aware of the difference between corporate and startup, but I've never actually thought about the fact that startups are a lot more relaxed in their approach.
Oh, absolutely. It would be common for at the startup, for example, if we all wanted to work from, or we had a common area with sofas and so on. So, we would have a few of us that would have our laptops there working and getting our work done. Everybody was very driven and motivated, but there was a lot more of that. There was also some camaraderie where we would be working, but we might chat about music or movies and take a little bit of a side tour to talk about that, or to discuss something that really interesting that's happening in the world of AI or machine learning or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, how much of the professional facade that you exist behind is down to gender, or do you think both sexes have to deal with that?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think that both genders in general have just people that are working have this kind of conscious separation of who you are professionally versus who you are personally. I feel like there's a lot more integration between people's lives now as far as their workplace and work life and personal life, because so much more of us is online and connected.
Right. On Scilence, we talk about gender differences, but then there are some women I talk to where it's just not even an issue. I mean, they're in a workplace and maybe at a time in history where gender issues aren't such a big deal. But have you ever been conscious of them yourself?
I've definitely been conscious of particularly just the dialogue that's been happening around that. When I first started working in tech, I had, I suppose, the benefit of working in a very mixed environment from the beginning. So I had been interning at a startup while I was in school, and it was a pretty wide mix. So at that point, it wasn't something that I had really thought about or realized. And coming out of school, I was also actually very lucky in that I was at a small managed service provider consulting company that had a pretty good gender balance of female and male engineers. But I had also, at some point later on in my career, realized that there were, and as I changed jobs, there were several jobs and roles I was at where I would be either the only female engineer, the only female at certain meetings where we would have several people there. Sometimes I'd be the only female and the youngest person in the room, sometimes by 10 years. And so just as I went through the industry, I had started to get involved with some different women's tech groups, more just because I realize that there's this space for being able to engage with and interact with other women, and that there is sort of this gap in the number of women that are in the tech field. So there are two pieces of it where, one, I had really the benefit of being able to be exposed to and interact with these very mixed environments. But I think I'm very conscious of it right now because it's very much something that's in the public dialogue, where there are a lot of things that are happening in the news, in the media, throughout the tech industry. There's a very, very hyper conscious focus and hypersensitivity around the issues of gender. And I think it is a very complicated thing that is happening, because the ideal is that we have this sort of diverse environment, diverse backgrounds and perspectives, because that's a really valuable thing on a team to have.
I guess we'll end up talking more about that, but going right back to your early years, did you know that you were going to end up doing what you do? First of all, what do you do? What is a DevOps engineer?
So there are two parts there, and so I think this might be a little bit of a long background, but I absolutely didn't know that I was going to end up in technology. I think from the age of maybe 5 or 6, thought that I was going to be a doctor. And specifically, I don't know how I landed on this, but I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. Um, so for many years, everybody in my family and extended family knew, that's what she wants to do. That's what she's been talking about since she was a kid. I had took my MCATs. I was a pre-med student, but somewhere in college, I realized that this was something that I didn't have the passion for, that I wasn't, uh, that the dream that I had when I was a kid was not the same as kind of my goals and motivations and interests as an adult. And so I kind of switched midway through, and at the time was just working at a startup. It started to get really interested into technology, and I sort of fell into that field by accident and found out that I really loved it. So I ended up kind of switching tracks in that direction. And then so that's, I think, the first part of it, getting to being in the tech industry to begin with. And then the second part, as far as DevOps engineering, I guess very loosely it falls in the field of computer systems engineering. It's sort of an evolution of this sort of traditional part of tech that is sort of systems administration and operations, working with servers, infrastructure, databases, and so on. And it's sort of been evolving currently where DevOps is almost the next iteration of that, where it involves a lot more integration with the development and software engineering teams. Um, so there's a little bit of coding involved. There is a lot of working with creating tools that will help the developers deploy their code onto systems and so on. So, for example, if you have a website and developers working on creating this website, the role of DevOps might be to set up the systems on the back end that allow that to run, the systems that allow that website to perform if you go from 100 users to 100,000 users. So we're working on a lot of these backend systems and infrastructure, responding if there are issues, helping to create and develop tools. Um, and it's actually can be a very different role depending on the type of organization that you're in, the type of organization, the type of product that they have. Your role might involve just different pieces of work.
Gosh, I mean, did you have to go for specific training for that, or were you able to make that turn from pre-med?
So it's definitely been uh, I guess an evolving process, because one, I ended up finishing with a liberal arts bachelor of arts degree from school. I had been double majoring at the time in like molecular bio uh, and literature. And when I decided not to go pre-med, I just finished with my literature degree. So I don't even have a tech degree, but I had taken a couple, there are a lot of boot camps out there. So somewhere, after about a year of being out of school, I had taken some boot camps that were more certification related to specific tech certs at the time. Um, and that school actually ended up going out of business while I was attending the program. So it was like I had gotten midway through. It was maybe I think a 6-week thing. Uh, but outside of that, a lot of the learning and education, and this is something I found with a lot of people that are in sort of the systems administration operations field, just ends up being ongoing, because some of the tools that we're using right now have only been around for a couple of years. So there's this constant cycle of training and learning, some on the job, some on my own, sometimes going to workshops or conferences, doing just sort of these online, sort of informal. There are a lot of good resources online for learning tech and coding and so on.
Yeah.
But it's definitely just kind of this ongoing cycle of sort of training and retraining to be able to learn and evolve with the new tools and skills that are required.
It sounds like a lot of self-direction was involved, because I think one of the not problems, but slight downsides of being at university is that you don't really learn much about the real world until you finish. And then that's like starting from the beginning and, having to learn life from scratch.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of that sort of continuous loop of self-direction because even even looking at some of the tools and some of the things that you can focus on, I mean, there is so much out there happening in the world of technology that it's just not possible to absorb and know and be expert at all of the things. And that's, I think, sometimes the pressure, especially because as when you come into an organization or as a tech resource, there are all of the questions or people end up reliant on you for being able to know or support or work on a certain thing or a certain type of technology. I suppose there's somewhat of that balance of being able to um, learn and focus on what's needed for the work that you're doing at hand, but then also sort of looking ahead to build and evolve with some of the new tech that's coming out.
Mm.
Um, and to know when to focus on what is, you know, it's kind of a gamble. You don't know necessarily. Sometimes there may be two or three competing tools that come out, or two competing technologies, or pieces of software where they solve the same problem. Uh, and maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, one specific piece of software emerges as the sort of leader in the market or as sort of the front runner, but there may not be a way of knowing that in the beginning. And so there's sort of this evolution, but also the ability to kind of switch your skills if something seems like it's the tool or the tech that's more in demand right now.
Is your job very competitive?
As far as my role itself,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would necessarily characterize it as competitive. The organization that I'm at is pretty collaborative. I know that there are people that may be individually competitive, but as far as just um, the space that I'm in currently, um, I know that there is some space where people would like to be and achieve and create the best things. But as far as where I'm oriented and maybe the things that I focus on, like that's something I guess that I personally don't feel.
It sounds like you've always been very much in the STEM fields. How easy were those subjects for you growing up? Like, were you a natural?
I don't know if I would say natural or how I would characterize that. I was just a very good student in general. Uh, so that was something that had always kind of been ingrained in me is uh, just I studied well. I just sort of naturally had excelled in classes. I was bumped up ahead a year when I was in elementary. So it was something that as kind of at a young age I had always just kind of really been um, interested in learning, interested in um, being able to have that sort of curiosity about new things.
Mm.
I had done a lot of reading. My mom was a nurse, and she had all of these science books about different topics that would be in the closet. So I'd pull it down at I don't remember what age, and maybe not understand 70% of the words that are in there, but I would put little sticky notes and highlight and write in the margins.
Yeah, so this is real fascination or thirst for learning.
Yes.
And who inspired you growing up? Like, did you have role models or just people encouraging you?
I think definitely my parents had definitely that focus on um, school and excelling. There was always very much that push, uh, sometimes a gentle push, sometimes a hard push to do well in school and to study and so on. But also, I think just that excitement and interest about the world around you. And I guess the last point to that is I did have teachers around that would definitely encourage that as well. Uh, that would kind of see that I was interested, and that would try to be able to sort of encourage and give me sort of that attention or insight.
Is that because you wanted that attention, or was it that they could see the potential in you? Maybe it was both.
Yeah, possibly. Um, and definitely on, I think, the potential side of things, I was very much a quiet student and didn't like getting a lot of attention. In fact, I sometimes would not want to do as well as I did in classes, just because uh, it would get me a lot of attention, and I was really self-conscious about that. So it took me a little bit of time to be able to get past that, get past the point of feeling like it's okay to be able to be recognized for excelling or achieving and so on.
How did you feel when you did leave medical school?
Well, I was still a pre-med student at the time, so at least I hadn't gotten to that last phase, but it was very much I guess mixed feelings, because one, it had been sort of an anchor that I knew I was directing myself towards, but with tech, it ended up being a lot more ambiguous. I had been working at this startup at the time and had been interested in that personally, but I think I didn't quite realize or know that is what I wanted, or that is where I wanted to go, or that is what my future career path would be. So I think coming out of school, there was definitely this period of time of not really knowing or having that answer about what's next. Uh, once I fell into tech and started working there, I didn't have any question anymore. I knew that's what I wanted to be doing, and that's where I wanted to be. And I've spoken with some friends and just other people in my life that are might not know or have that clear focus or idea of where their passions or future career path lies, which is definitely an okay thing. But I knew once I started working in the tech world that was something that I really loved. But that space in between was definitely kind of a weird place for me to be, because I think it took about, I ended up actually finishing college early as well, because I had a lot of units from double majoring. And so when I dropped my second major, I said, okay, well, I could hang out here for a little bit, or I could sort of get on with and try to figure out where I'm going to be next. Um, so I finished, I graduated, and that year I spent doing a lot of different things, kind of just being out and floating on the market. Not quite a sort of a year off, but also sort of looking and exploring. And that was just a time of a lot of, uh, you know, kind of questions and trying to understand where I wanted to be.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of questions were going through your head? Because I think it's quite a common thing to change career paths. Our career lives are quite long on average,
Oh yeah,
and not many people end up doing what they studied.
absolutely. Gosh, so it's been quite a while since I've been out of school. So I think at that time, just mostly it was centered around, the what's next. Um, the more currently, the career change and uh, question is something I think that's been coming up with a lot of peers recently, where it's very oriented around, like I'm here in this sort of mid-career space, and a lot of it is maybe not changing industries, but also looking at the evolution of my career, because especially with the roles that I've been in, the two very general tracks are, you can kind of continue on with becoming a senior engineer in that specific specialty, or maybe even developing another specialty beyond that, like if that specialty is um, data and databases, for example, or is in architecture of a certain kind, systems architecture of a certain kind. And so there's this sort of senior engineering track. And then there's the engineering management track, which is also another path of the evolution career wise. And so I think that with that career change and career evolution, it definitely becomes a thing of, well, what's next to be able to grow to or to be able to level up to, I guess.
I mean, do you think maybe you switched careers from neuroscience or, that kind of field, the medical field, to the tech field because it was unpredictable?
I don't know if it was necessarily that it was unpredictable, but I knew at the time when I started working in tech that it was exciting and that it was new and that there was this constant cycle of being able to learn and do something that I have not done before.
Yeah, I can see how this opportunity to be right at the forefront of technological change can be very alluring.
Yes, no, definitely.
So, as a woman in an industry that is constantly evolving and growing, how have you been able to plan out your life? Do you even have a plan or a vision?
Um, I have constantly changing plans. I have a tendency to overplan. I'll plan, weekly, quarterly, monthly, long term, and then I'll go back and sort of do another iteration of that and completely scrap my old plan. So I guess it's a lot of continuous reflection again, I guess, of looking at where I am and what I'm um, looking at in the coming year, for example, like the things that I want for myself, goals and priorities wise. So I think there's that sort of constant reevaluation of, um, you know, right now, what are the things that drive me or are important to me that I'm looking for in my life to have? And I mean that's a changing target.
Mm. What is important to you, and where do you see yourself in the future? Like, what are your ambitions?
I think I'm actually in the middle of a cycle of trying to sort that out. I was actually doing business coaching for a good portion of last year, not doing the coaching myself, but seeing a business coach for that purpose of looking at where I wanted to go, just career wise, personally. Um, and I think that's definitely something that I'm sorting out. I did know I started at a new job not too long ago, and I had been so a few years back I was at a company that I'd been at for maybe about 5 or 6 years. I was basically running the IT department over there, so I was kind of at this level that was comfortable. I had leadership. I was doing some leadership and so on, but it didn't really give me a lot of space to be able to grow and move forward.
Right.
And so at that point, I decided that it's about time that I had to figure out what was next. So I spent a couple of years, and I think where I'm at now and where I landed was because I wanted to really start learning and diving deep and to be able to build some skills that I just wasn't able to focus on as far as new technologies go.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to one do that, but also just to be able to start focusing on a few other things, maybe doing some more um, writing, like maintaining my personal website, submitting for conference talks, and so on.
What are your conference talks on? Like, do you have a specific interest?
And particularly in DevOps, there are a few topics that I had been looking at. Um, and so I've got a few different ideas right now, but I'm still working on like fully fleshing them out.
Right, so it's all within your industry. You're just figuring out how to have a direction, a
Yes.
specific
Yeah,
direction.
yeah, definitely.
I guess that's a very career-based conundrum,
Hmm.
basically. It sounds like you're always constantly asking yourself, like, am I doing what's right for me? Does this feel good? Am I happy? Would you say that's fair to say?
Yes.
So do you think that's a conventional way of handling it? Or because I don't know anyone that does what you do. And I'm just wondering whether your approach to your career is common within your field or whether you're quite unusual within your industry.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if, how uh, unique or common it is. I guess within the community that I'm in and the community that I reach out to, um, I'm around people who also are kind of interested in focusing on, what um, and on focused on not necessarily being on just autopilot where you come in, you do your work and you leave, but more of looking at, um, you know, what's next? Where would I like to go? What do I want out of my life? Um, what would I like to be able to kind of contribute in a larger sense?
Some people really don't think about themselves. They just kind of, as you sort of hinted at, like this idea of just, some people just want to go in at 9 and leave at 5, do their job thoroughly, but they don't kind of reflect on it. But it sounds like you do put the effort in to reflect on your happiness within your job. And I'm just wondering if that is a trend of people within your industry, because I know nothing about your industry. So I'm wondering if it's a trend within your industry or whether it's more personal to you and the way you operate.
I mean, I know it's personal to me in particular, but also I don't know what it's like across the industry, but I know that there are people out there that are looking at and reflecting on being able to find that sort of happiness and fulfillment at work. I think it's definitely been uh, sort of this trend and focus of figuring out how to and also this may be just the way that I'm oriented, so I see the people that are into this, but that trend of being able to figure out how to bring your life in alignment with the work that you do,
Mm.
and being able to find that ability to contribute in a meaningful way. And I think that's part of it, is that one, there's the career and the tech that I'm currently at, but also looking at how to use what I do and know to make um, a larger meaningful impact on the world, on this the space that we live, beyond just helping build widgets. How to be able to use that to contribute to um, just the larger community that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that you are doing that, because I think it really makes a big difference when people are able to apply themselves to a job that they love. You did mention like that you reflect on, whether you're happy, whether you're being fulfilled, and that sort of guides you as to where you should be in your career. So,
Yes, and I mean it's always an ongoing challenge, because there's you know it's work is never going to be exciting and engaging and thrilling 100% of the
yeah,
time. Life doesn't is not 100% of the time going to be you know magic and wonderful and
yeah.
airbrushed and perfect. So I think it's figuring out how to be able to maintain all of that, and to keep focus on the things that are fulfilling and exciting and nourishing, I guess, in the middle of just life and work and everything being messy in one way or another.
Yeah, it's very different from our parents' generation, don't you think? I mean, I think today we have the luxury of really being able to apply ourselves to things that we're passionate about. I mean, it's definitely more possible to do that today than it ever has been. And I know that my parents' generation, they worked to keep a roof over their head.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. I know that my parents both immigrated here, in the 70s, and they had very much come from a position of, uh, working to be able to provide and to be able to create a future for their children. My mom had been really lucky in that she enjoyed, like she very much enjoyed and applied herself in the work that she was in. But at the same time, the end goal was always, I'm able to create and be successful and be able to provide for my family and so on. Um, so she was very much oriented around that. My dad as well. He just, you know, he worked as a function of knowing that this is this is something that I'm doing to be able to, earn a living and provide, but not necessarily that I'm doing this work because it inspires joy.
Yeah. And so when they look at you kind of doing what you're doing, do they get you?
Not in the beginning. I mean, when I first switched off of going to med school into something different, then there were just a lot of the questions and not so much not completely understanding, but just I think the concern of, are you doing the things that you need to build your future? And so I'd been working in some different tech companies, and uh, somewhere early on in my career, I think I was probably around 25, I went out on my own and I started freelancing. I started a business doing tech consulting, and I had done that for a number of years. And throughout that time, there was the constant worry of, are you going to be making enough? Is this going to be, enough to support your future? Uh, and also just sort of gentle suggestions about, you can, uh, is tech what you want to be doing? Are there other stable career paths
Yeah.
and so on? So there was a little bit of that, and I think after time they really got the understanding of uh, this and me, my career, and what I wanted to be doing, where I'm at, and so on.
Mm. How did you manage their worries? I mean, did you get worried when they were worried?
I don't think I got worried about myself. I think there was maybe the instinctive, parent-child defensiveness of like, I'm doing okay, it's okay,
Yeah. Oh, I
Uh,
know that well.
yeah. So there, sometimes gentle discussions, sometimes not as gentle discussions, but
Yeah.
I think we're at a good understanding with each other. I mean, especially now at this point, with,
Mm.
having been here and doing this for so long.
It's always so difficult, isn't it? Because to really carve out a career path in an industry that is itself growing, it can be quite a strain on one's self belief. Because it's like, I want to believe in myself. I want to believe that this is going to turn out good, but I don't actually know because no one's ever done this, or very few have trodden this path. So, how did you cope with all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm still coping. I mean, there's always a constant, especially when working on and making transitions into, different companies, working with different tech. There's always sort of these cycles of um, figuring out how to uh, cope or handle, like, I think that the constant, I have a lot of just the constant self pressure of trying to be better and know more, and um, especially with working on something new, having to handle just the frustration of feeling uh, like I need to be better or know more right away, or that what if I'm not able to, um, like for example, I was working on a new software system for a tool that we're putting out, and there was a big just learning curve of being able to go through the documentation and kind of self read and experimenting and working on tweaking the system to get everything up and running, and just going through that cycle of things aren't working. I'm not sure how. Am I good enough? Am I doing the right thing? Am I, there's always that self battle of feeling secure like, am I competent at my job, and so on. And so being able to talk myself down from, the that constant, and I mean, I think a lot of it is self-created pressure. There's nobody telling me that I'm bad at something. There's nobody telling me that I'm not doing well at my job. I mean, people are telling me the opposite, but it's still in my head, I'll go through these things of like, okay, I need to be doing this better. I need to be, but figuring out how to do that where I'm at the point where once upon a time, I would do 60-hour weeks. I would do these crazy hours, especially when I was consulting. It's like I would sleep at my computer, I wake up at my computer, and I've gotten to the point where I'm like, no, I don't have to. I can be focused on and love the work that I'm doing and dedicated to doing a good job at work, but I can also say that, uh, at some point I can finish with work at my place of employment and then look at doing my own projects, or you know or spending time at home, or spending time with my husband, or building working on community stuff, or even just like telling myself. For a while it got to be uh it took me a while to get to the point where I'm like, oh, I can be okay feeling like I can just hang out and have a completely laptop off social evening with friends and be okay with that's not a networking event, that we're just like sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah.
And to feel like I'm not being productive in that moment in time. So it was something I had to let go of. It was that constant need of like feeling like I've got to be productive. I've got to be, achieving something. I've got to be doing something that's quote meaningful. But the meaningful thing is like something that you just tell yourself that this is meaningful or not meaningful, or important or not important to be doing.
Gosh, you sound so self-driven. It's really inspiring.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that I've been like just evolving as a person to yeah, I suppose so.
How do you balance all those different factors of life? The personal, you mentioned you're married, the work. I mean, do you want to have children? As a woman in technology, is there a secret formula to having it all?
I think if there was, there would be people paying a lot of money to find that or
Yeah.
to hear it. I mean, myself included. I think that family in the future, it's still kind of a big uh, question of just something that we're figuring out as we go. I mean, yes, no, maybe, yes, no, maybe. That's sort of the constant cycle.
Right.
Uh, and I think just as far as balancing or integrating, I think now it's more looking at just sort of integrating all of the pieces of my life. And uh, I guess, I don't know if it's a movement or whatever you want to call it, but just the power of saying no to things is something that I've definitely had to start to be okay with, is knowing that I it's just not possible to do everything or to be everything to everyone.
Right.
And so being able to start to more clearly prioritize and focus um, on the things that I know that are important, and are important to be able to spend time on. So that might mean that something will be either cut out, or to be able to say that, hey, it's okay if I decide not to take on another project, or if I decide not to help out or volunteer for X or Y, or if I say that I'm not able to deliver on a deadline because I already have some other projects that are important. So I think it's just being able to figure out how to um, prioritize all of that, and to be able to look at and do the things that are important, and to have sort of the confidence in myself to say that, this um, like maybe having some time off on a Sunday to be able to recharge and take a break is more important than having to, uh, work on this website or to help somebody with, you know, planning a community event or something like that. And I think there's a way to be able to set those personal expectations and the expectations with other people in a way that is not, um, it's not necessarily like you're being rude or saying, well, no, I don't want to do that. It's more of just having the boundaries around that, and that personal space around the things that you need to do in life. And it's always growing. It's always uh, a work in progress to figure out.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, were the lack of boundaries because you were scared you might lose out on something?
yeah, I mean, I guess it's partially that, just the desire to be able to do and to be able to do and be things for other people.
But was that for to meet other people's expectations, or was that to meet your own expectations of yourself?
I think probably a bit of both.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like, most women have that experience, or at least, many of the women on my show experience kind of needing to do as much as they can in order to get where they want to go in their careers. Um,
Totally.
and sometimes I think women have kind of reported that they have to work even harder than their male counterparts just to prove themselves. Do you think that's why you push yourself so hard? Or are you just very strongly self-driven regardless?
I don't know if that's why I push myself personally. Um, I've kind of had that built in, but I know that as far as just being in industry, something that I've seen is that, uh, because there are fewer women that are in some of these fields, like that are in tech, for example, uh, it's there's part of it is having to work and pull up a little bit more, because it's almost like, um, sometimes what will happen is that the woman that's there ends up being kind of the spokesperson or figurehead or whatever for all other women in tech. So almost like
Yeah,
their achievements or accomplishments are scrutinized to that level, and then become reflective of other women that are
yeah.
doing similar roles. It's like you gotta, be the speaker or be the achiever for everyone,
The
which is,
representative of all
yeah, the
women.
representative, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Or sometimes it's like, one, yeah, I think it's important to continue having dialogues, and then it's also, challenging sometimes too, because there are days where you want to be able to just come in and do your work and not have to worry about all of the gender issues, but they're there.
Mm,
um, and sometimes it's like, well, I wish I could just focus on doing my job and doing the tech.
mm.
But I think as an industry and as a community, everybody's very much, interested in that conversation and what we're kind of going to collectively do to make sure that it is, a place that has the sort of the diversity and the richness of experiences and backgrounds and everything.
Yeah. I mean, we met through a Women in Tech event that you organized. And, why did you feel like you needed to organize events like that?
Um, so I had gotten, very involved, both at a leadership level and now, just because I had kind of scaled back at a much smaller level with helping to, create and run different women's tech events. And I think part of that was just to be able to create that sense of community, of women with shared experiences, and some experiences that aren't shared, but where everybody could kind of relate to each other and feel that sense of, of belonging, of being able to have resources and other people to reach out to that have that understanding of being a woman in some of these industries, and also just to be able to encourage in a few different ways. One, for kind of retention, like the more that you're able to feel like there's this community around you and supporting you, the less likely that you'll um, drop out of something that's STEM or engineering related. Because one, it's part of it is being able to encourage more women to enter that field because they can relate to it in one way or another. And it's whether it's like a psychological thing or whatever. If you're looking at or exploring a field and you don't see anybody that is like you, or you feel like you might not have that sense of belonging because everybody that you know that's an engineer is a male, for example, or has a completely different background from you, then there's less likelihood to even enter or explore that field to begin with, because you don't associate that with something that you want, or with a direction that you want to go. And then there's the second piece of it of retention and being able to stay in the industry. So I think having groups like this that aren't really exclusionary, but they're inclusive and they are encouraging and supportive, just helps so that we have this sort of shared space to be able to support each other. So I think that was a lot of it, was just that I had been kind of excited by the idea of having a space where people can be able to connect, and people have had positive experiences and people have had negative experiences. And I think providing a space where everyone can kind of feel safe and encouraged in spite of anything that may have happened, is an important thing to have.
Yeah. I mean, from everything that we've been talking about, I don't get the impression that you identify yourself as being in a minority, or maybe you're just extremely strong about it. But I don't feel like you feel disadvantaged being a woman in tech.
Yeah, I suppose not. And I think maybe part of it is just that uh, as a kid, I'd always been in the minority as far as the things that I was interested in. I was always like interested in things that, uh, you know, just with the school and the place that I was at, like the things that I was into, other people just didn't care or weren't interested. So, I got, yeah, I had gotten kind of used, which I'm not saying that that's a good
Right.
thing. I mean, I think it would
So
have
you're
been great to
used to
have
it.
friends at that age that were like, oh, cool, like we can pretend to be outdoor archaeologists, like digging in the garden or something. um, like that would have been amazing. But I think I had just gotten to where I knew that there was a lot of things that I was into that were maybe like weird or not things that other kids weren't. And so I think maybe more as a um, maybe just by numbers of gender, but uh, I think I've gotten to where I um, look for the positive things, and uh, be able to use that to just be able to kind of continue to move forward.
Hmm. I mean, considering that, you have had a childhood like that where you have felt like a minority, you do incredibly well in bringing people together. Um, so, you've really turned things
Thank you.
around in that sense of bringing women in tech together as a community. So, maybe the challenge you faced when you were young has kind of paid off as an adult, because it's given you the motivation to not experience that kind of marginalized feeling again.
Yeah, no, I think definitely.
I'm really curious to know, like, the fact that you're married, how, what has been your reflections on starting a family? Because obviously it's one of the major things that women can do. Um, and so what has been your sort of like thought process through it?
So I'm pretty newly married, actually. We had been engaged for some time, and just ended up, there were a lot of different life things happening, family. and so on. And so we had gotten engaged and then postponed for a bit. And so finally we just ended up, running away and eloping at the end of last year. So it's just been a few months or so now.
Oh, cool. Yeah, because I don't remember, the times we've met, I don't remember you being married. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm so surprised I never knew that. But okay, it's a recent thing. That makes sense.
And I guess it's a complicated thing because, I had been previously married and divorced. And one of the big things at the point when I had divorced my ex is like we were having some really intense discussions about starting a family where he was really interested in starting one, but at the time we just weren't really at a stable place. I was freelancing. He just had didn't have a stable work history for various reasons, and uh, I had come from like this place of like, well, no, we need to be responsible. We need to plan. Like if we're going to do a family, then we're going to, make sure that things are stable and we're in the position to be able to do that. And my ex had been kind of like, no, throw caution to the wind. It's okay. We'll figure it out and make it work. And I'm like, well, you have to pay for formula and diapers and childcare and all this other stuff. So that was kind of one of the driving reasons that, that was part of it. There was a lot of other reasons why we weren't right for each other. And so now I think it's something that we definitely have been able to have just these very good discussions with each other. And it's something that, we're just taking, not so much a day at a time, but, we're just planning and looking at what our future looks like. And it's definitely something that's on the table that we're figuring out as we go, I guess. I know it's definitely something that as a woman that you have certain time frames for. Like I've got friends that have gone and through the process of freezing eggs, and because that it's become a thing apparently up in Silicon Valley and other places. You have these egg freezing parties now, but it's also a really intense and invasive process, and it's expensive and painful from what I've heard.
Yeah, and also I don't know many women who have actually used them, their frozen eggs. So, I think we're in an era where the technology of egg freezing kind of gives hope, but there hasn't been enough of that technology around to see the result of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also just other people that are peers have, like I've had friends that have gone through just fertility issues and treatments and so on. And so there are a lot of these real life concerns that are there, and all of that, of course, just kind of sits in. It camps out in its special section of my brain, So I think it's just part of. I think I may not have a very clear answer for you as far as planning goes right now, but maybe come back to me in 6 months or a year, and I'll have some answers for you.
Yeah, that really is a kind of great note to end on, because honestly, I feel like women in STEM are juggling so much in terms of, getting educated, learning how to be in the workplace, building a career, progressing in that career. And it's kind of like a situation whereby this idea of starting a family and doing all those very maternal things gets slightly pushed to one side. And then you reach an age where you're like, oh, I haven't given that any thought because I've been focusing on my career so much. I better do something about it. And sometimes it can be just that little bit too late. So, I appreciate your honesty in saying I don't have an answer for you right now, because I think that really represents what a lot of women are going through at the moment, where they're just wanting to follow their heart career-wise. But somewhere in their brain, there is this little kind of section that's going, oh, there's this kid thing. that I need to address at some point when the time feels right. And I don't think anyone's got the magic formula as to how to do that yet, without some kind of compromise being involved.
Totally. And it's just, I think a matter of people figuring out with where they're at, where they want their life to be, or I guess more like what they want their life to look like down the road. It's like, do you picture that, family? Do you picture the career? Because now you may want one thing, but 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, you could be in a completely different space. And it's like all the things. It's not like it's like nothing is impossible, but just it's like the things that we do now end up taking us somewhere.
Yeah.
And we'll readjust, but it takes us in one direction or another.
Yeah, I mean, we live in very interesting times, I think, where there seems to be more questions than answers the way technology and science is going. But thank you so much for sharing your reality with us. It's just been really interesting to see how a woman that has a lot of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle is attempting to put those pieces together. It's just been very interesting to see you doing that, sort of like formulating your vision of how you want your life to look. So it's just been fantastic listening to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me.
That's it from my STEM guest this week. What an interesting conversation about a time in your life where you've got the whole world at your feet, it seems, having chosen your career path, met the one, and yet with all of those pieces of the jigsaw, it's still about formulating that picture and really always checking in with your heart and asking yourself, am I happy? And is this really what I want? My guest has really inspired me about the process of doing that and the fact that it is ongoing. Thank you so much for listening this week. Please do subscribe and leave comments and reviews, and I'll catch you next week on Scilence.